If you agree, we would like to record this session, and the recording has already started. So now is the time to drop off if you don't like this. But I think it's really great to be together in this meeting, and also to have. And I'm sorry, I still am struggling with how to pronounce your first name, but Sean Boisen.
Yeah,
yes.
Sean.
Yeah, it will do. So, and Sean is a former employee of Faithlife, so the software company who is been producing Logos Bible software, and now we are working for Clear Bible. And you've also been involved in some mapping projects. You are a member of our group, and yeah, well, we would really like to learn from you and how you have been using geography, but also on what kind of work you are currently doing, and especially also with language groups, as I also know. So please take the floor, and would you like to have interrupt? Do you want to be interrupted for questions, or would you like to people to ask their questions afterwards?
Yeah, I'm happy for people to interrupt at any point. I am new to Microsoft Teams, so I'll probably have a few. I may have a few issues on managing that, but I've got the meeting chat open on the right. So if you want, you can either, I guess, raise a hand. Seems there's a way to do that. Let's see. Okay, my hand is raised, it says. So if you want to raise your hand, I might see it, or type a question into the chat if you want, or just feel free to barge in. Let me just ask, is the audio okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
And
Yes.
great. And can somebody help me figure out how to share my slides?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, so at the top, I've made sure that you can present. So if you go to the top of your screen, there should be a little, at least on my computer, it's next to the red leave button. There's a little share button. I was going to say, can you share your screen? Yeah, to show me. Yeah, no, you can't share me.
I don't have quite the same layout on a Mac.
Oh, I am on a Mac.
Huh.
So
what am I missing? I've got a little bar across the bottom that's got like the phone to hang up and a share tray, but if I open the share tray, I don't see anything in the tray.
Oh, yes, because Mac has the increased security standards. I believe that what we may have to do is you may have to like click allow Teams to share. I'm not sure, and then like close and come back.
You probably have to go into the system preferences, the system settings in the security area, and there's going to be a missing permission for Teams.
Let's see if I can find that. Isn't technology great, making all of our lives easier?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I suggest the other members of the team start praying now for Sean. So
I guess the other thing would be if you if it's a deck, and so you could just send it to someone, and someone else could share their screen. That's another option.
Yes. Okay, let me do this. I'm just going to hang up for a minute and come back and see if it re-prompts me to do some systems thing that I blasted right through when I first saw it. I'll be back real quick.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, anyway, I guess we'll just take a moment here and welcome everyone yet again. Oh, Sean, you're back. All right.
That did not do it. Well, that's annoying. Okay, so
but I'm going to make a note of this, that I need to figure this out to make sure that I share in future with people in the future how to do this, because clearly we're not being super helpful. So
let's try this. Here's a bit.ly URL, and if somebody can go there and, oops, if I can copy it.
Vincent, would you be okay sharing your screen? And
yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Let's see, now I've got to get the chat back.
Really?
Conversation. Okay, what failed to send? Oh, Sean Boisen no longer has access to the chat.
Okay. Could you spell the link out?
Sure. bit.ly
Yes.
/ SBOISEN
SBOISEN, yes.
dash
Yes.
NEWTECH.
Okay, that's the difficult part. So yeah, a bit more slowly. So the N.
bit.ly, then / SBOISEN
Yes.
dash
Yes.
NEWTECH, new tech.
NEWTEZ. Okay.
TECH, as
Yeah.
in technology.
I just put it in the chat, Vincent.
Okay. Okay.
But if I have no access to the chat, that's going to be problematic, right? Okay, I can see people hopping in, so some people have found it at least. Is there a way, well, do I need access to the chat? I suppose I don't if people want to just raise their hand or whatever, but.
Yeah. And Vincent, are you okay sharing your screen with the presentation?
Yes. Let me see. Here it is.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yes. Okay. So
now I have a button that says take control of the presentation. I wonder what that does.
Okay, let's try.
Okay, clicking the button.
Okay.
Waiting for approval.
Allow. And now.
Okay, I'm not sure what that then gives me, but.
Okay, I see your cursor, so probably if you now click, it will proceed to the next slide. Yes.
Look at that. Okay, so now let's back up.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
We've got that out of the way. And if you didn't get the bit.ly URL, I mean, it's on the screen there, but apparently you can also scan that little QR code and get the same thing. Okay, so sorry about all of that falderall. The topic that Vincent and I worked out for today was new technology for Bible understanding and translation. Let's see. Okay, looks like my arrows work. So just a little bit about me. Long ago, I did a master's in computational linguistics at UCLA. That's kind of what my academic background is. I really think of myself as a technologist or an information innovator, somebody who likes to sort of think of new things and bring them to life. And so I'm kind of at the beginning of the third phase of my careers, or my third career in that space. I spent almost 20 years in natural language processing with a company called BBN Technologies, now part of Raytheon, where I was doing government-funded R&D, was a technology manager, then eventually moved into sort of technology transition and marketing in the government space. So this was back, primarily in the 90s and the early 2000s, where we were working on problems in named entity extraction, information extraction, speech and language processing. Back when those were research topics, right? Today, the big tech companies have sort of lured away most of the people who were government researchers back then, many of whom I worked with, so now one of my colleagues is a VP of Alexa, and another one is working on speech at Amazon. And but back then, these were research topics, right? Now they're all, on the phones in our pockets. And we take them for granted. But back then, those were, we were trying to figure out how to make all that stuff work. So I learned a lot about natural language, of course, but also about knowledge management. In particular, I worked with a guy who was part of, then we called it DAML, but today it is OWL, web ontology language. And it got me thinking about how would you take information about the biblical text and encode it in some of these semantic knowledge forms. And so I started blogging, you know, sitting on my couch nights and weekends and working on hobby projects. And eventually bumped into some folks from, now it's called Faithlife, then it was called Logos Bible Software, who said, hey, you sound like our kind of guy. We're looking for people who want to work on Bible data. Why don't you come work with us? So that was in 2007. And I was with them until just this past September, with a somewhat abrupt departure, I'm afraid. But, you know, loved my time there, where I was a senior information architect and director of the content innovation team, which ranged in size from, you know, half a dozen. I think at our biggest point we were maybe up to about 20 people, and I managed that group where we had a variety of projects for building and managing biblical knowledge. And so about about half of what I'm going to talk about today will be related to the sort of GIS side of the things we did. Well, that came to an end, as I said, and so I was very happy that then some folks from Clear Bible said, hey, we'd love to have you. And so I'm a whopping 3 months now in with Clear Bible, so still learning a lot, but with them I am a principal data scientist and working on one of their 2 primary projects, which is called Enhanced Resources++. And so kind of the second half of the talk will be about what I'm doing with them. So there's a little, you know, schizophrenia here. I'll kind of be old Sean for a while, and then I'll be new Sean talking about our new projects. So here's where I'm going with the talk. I'll say a little bit about a couple of different significant projects that that I managed, that we, you know, the team was responsible for at Logos, our Biblical Places data set, and then our Atlas work. Then I'll shift gears and I'll talk about Clear, what Clear's goals are overall, in particular with syntax, and then the new project that I'm working on for media curation and alignment. And then I've got just one slide waving my hands a little about some other activities using AI in the Bible translation community. Okay, so just a quick overview for those who aren't familiar with Logos Bible Software. Again, the parent company is now called Faithlife, and their general charter is using technology to equip the church to grow in the light of the Bible. For many years, Logos has been their flagship product, but they've expanded out into a tool for essentially presentations as part of sermons called Faithlife Proclaim, Faithlife sites, websites for churches. They were sort of expanding into the church management space for a while. Now they've sort of pulled back from that. Lexham Press is their publishing house. And so many things get, you know, on the publication side get done there. They print both actual print copies of things, but also digital titles in Logos. But mostly what Logos does is take third-party publisher content. They're up to well over 150,000 books available in their platform, and make it available in this platform for Bible study. Pastors are a primary market, you know, those who preach regularly, lots of commentaries, lots of exegetical tools, lots of original language tools, localized into a variety of languages, available on a variety of platforms. So big, complicated thing, and I don't have time to go into all of that, and you know, maybe some of you are already familiar with that. So the group that I manage, which is called the Content Innovation Group, you know, we focused really on knowledge bases, data sets. A lot of that was linguistic data overlaid on the biblical text, but increasingly things beyond the biblical text, because we found basically that we'd sort of gotten all the books and made all the books available that we could, but increasingly we found, well, we really need data under the hood to support the activities that users want to perform with Logos. And so we sort of think of data, you know, as the gasoline that powered the engine. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Alan Kay. You know, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And so a lot of what we were doing was really trying to create data sets, new information products that nobody had ever built before, but that fit our mission, fit our goals. And at that point, we were happy to sort of have the funding from Logos Bible Software to pursue those things. And so those are the things we built. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of those projects today. Here's kind of an overview, not a complete one, of the kinds of things we were working on. So sort of center top, you can see this interconnected graph of biblical people, biblical places, biblical things, biblical artifacts, the events that tie them all together. You know, so the day of Pentecost would be an event. The people would be groups from a variety of nations. The place would be Jerusalem. I don't remember offhand if there were any significant, oh, well, they probably met in the temple. That would be an artifact. And there may have been some other things, you know, associated with that. So we, early on, we constructed a fairly elaborate and comprehensive database of all of these biblical entities and connected them together. But then we sort of moved out to other kinds of reference knowledge in the upper right, you know, concepts, really the things you would find in dictionaries, Bible dictionaries, Bible encyclopedias, other reference content like that. Linguistic data, commentaries and lexicons in particular, a whole lot of detailed linguistic information in the center, sort of layered up, right? So we created alignments between, for example, English Bible translations and the Greek and Hebrew sources, analysis of the words, the lemmas or dictionary forms, the morphological information, building up into a bunch of other things that are too complicated to explain in a brief time, other kinds of linguistic data, and other things, and that's probably plenty. The point was that was really our charter within Faithlife, and that group continues today. I'm just not part of it anymore. They're still doing some really innovative things in building new data. You know, so this last release of Logos this past fall had a lot of great work by one of my colleagues, Jessica Parks, on church history. So if you wanted to sort of understand the big sweep of church history, there's now a great resource that has sort of identified, how many? 20 or so major themes. Who are the people that were part of that, you know, like the development of the New Testament canon? Who are the people who were key players in that activity? What were the key documents? Or some of the timeline events? Really interesting stuff if you're interested in church history. Okay, so now let me focus in a little bit on the GIS relevant parts of what we did in my time at Faithlife. And one of the most significant ones, I think, and this was fairly early, was to create a database of biblical places. I don't remember the exact 100, 1,300 records in that data set. That were basically a combination of all the places named in the biblical text, and then a few other adjacent tells or other, you know, ancient sites that were particularly relevant to understanding biblical text. Obviously, you know, then you could sort of sweep out into all kinds of other things, and we did some of that too. But the biblical data was about that size. And this was, of course, curated by hand, right? We didn't, you know, there was no AI tool to generate this data for us. We tried to sort of script and streamline things as best we could. But basically, each biblical place, you know, take the city of Ephesus as an example, would have a unique identifier in our data set, preferred and alternate labels. So many biblical places have multiple names. And of course, the same name is sometimes used for multiple places. We eventually localized those into all of the languages that we have base packages for, 7 or 8. Sort of one sentence description of the place that we could display to somebody so that if you looked at it, you'd say, yeah, I guess that's the place I'm looking for. Comprehensive set of biblical references. So that means you could basically say, show me every passage that talks about Ephesus, and it would give you that entire list. That's pretty easy if you're just doing string matching. It's much harder when, of course, there are multiple names or even pronouns or other ways of referring to things. So that's a subtlety that people don't often think about when they think about searching the biblical text, is you actually have to sort of have a metadata layer that identifies the entities to be able to comprehensively search. This is not a places issue, but my favorite example of that is, you know, the famous passage in John 1 that talks about the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, goes on for 16 or 17 verses without ever using the word Jesus. But clearly it's talking about Jesus in that entire passage. Well, if you were just searching for the string Jesus, you'd never see those verses, right? So that's why the extensive linking of entities to the their biblical reference is really crucial. In addition to that, we would have links to Bible dictionary content. You know, for a well-known place like Ephesus, we might have 40 or 50 dictionaries that would have articles about that. To the Wikipedia page, of course, and then media. Some of that collected from various sources. You know, we commissioned media from a couple of different sources. We actually at one point had some teams who went to Palestine and did, you know, took video of various sites. And then things like maps and other sort of educational content, which I'll come to in a minute. Then the biblical event structure. As I mentioned briefly before, we did basically a comprehensive analysis of all the significant, that's a judgment call, events in the biblical text. I do not recall how many we came up with, you know, in the multiple of hundreds. And so again, my example before of, you know, Peter's speech at Pentecost in Acts 2. So that event would be represented, it would have connections to the people who were there, the place it took place, the setting. And so if you were then to look up Ephesus, you could find all of the biblical events that took place in Ephesus. In addition, we had links, we had an extensive database of events from world history, not biblical events. And so, you know, again, connecting different places to those world history events means you could see, okay, outside the biblical context, what are some other significant things that took place in the city of Ephesus? And then in the GIS domain, of course, we had geocoordinates for these places, some information about other nearby biblical places, the broader region that, you know, Ephesus was part of in different periods of time, and so that kind of data. So that, you know, that was, as you might imagine, a multi-year effort to gather and refine that kind of information. With some challenges, you know, so one of the most significant ones is simply the name variation process that I alluded to a moment ago. I think Jerusalem was the prize winner. We came up with 16 different names that are used in the biblical text to refer to the city of Jerusalem, these and a few others. And of course, different names might be used in different eras. So Jerusalem is never referred to in the New Testament as Ariel or Hephzibah. So in particular, when we later got to making maps, we had to actually have our set of names categorized by eras so we could choose the right name to put on the map for a given era, which again was just a sort of complex data problem. Location is also a really interesting challenge in the biblical places data. Of course, many of them we just don't know where they were. You know, scholars may have different levels of certainty, and basically we tried to sort of accept a scholarly consensus when we thought one existed, but things are always, you know, there's always debate about those, and some, you know, it's just mentioned once in some text in Deuteronomy that says, well, from the corner of this to the corner of that to the corner of that, and really nobody has a good idea where those places are. So that, you know, that's a challenge, of course, for mapping, but that, you know, we have to sort of follow the data where it leads. Some have moved, of course, over time. you can find on Google Maps today, Ephesus in Turkey, but that's not where the ancient city of Ephesus was. That's actually, I think, a couple miles away. And there are a number of cities that have moved. So just looking them up on Google Maps doesn't work, frankly. You have to actually sort of look more deeply into where it used to be. And if you want to show things like regions, of course, we have only sort of fuzzy notions of where the regions were. It's not like today where you can say, here's the line between two US states. There were no lines. There were just sort of rough areas of influence. And so all those and many more were sort of challenges as we tried to generate and collect this data. So once we had that set of data, then we wanted to move on to an atlas project. This was a pretty ambitious project. It took a lot longer than I thought it would, to be honest. But the basic idea was we wanted to have a map for every story in the Bible that sort of needs a map for you to understand it. So you don't need a map of Peter's speech in Jerusalem. You just need to know where Jerusalem is, right? But all of the things that involve travel, battles, those kinds of movements, they're hard to understand unless you have a map that tells you sort of where those places are, what the travel line looked like. That sometimes gives you some hints about how long it took, though we didn't get to the point of actually collecting that data. That's how Vincent and I got in touch with each other initially, is the interest in trying to compute travel times. So we had, I think we created something on the order of 260 maps. We had overview maps for 13 different biblical eras. So think, before the patriarchs, the era of the patriarchs, all the way up to the life of Jesus and the early church. Their purpose was really just to sort of get all of the relevant cities out on that map so that you could see where they all are. So those are not story maps. But then the remaining maps were essentially all tied to a passage and trying to communicate, almost all of them trying to communicate some biblical story to make it more understandable through the use of geography. So each of those maps included metadata for the passages that they were describing, the cities that were relevant to that story, and some other important reference cities, but clearly not every city, right? You have a very cluttered map if you put every city you know about on every map. So we were very selective, and that meant there was this sort of intensive map design process. All of the cities and other locations on the map were then hyperlinked to the reference information about those places or mountains or whatever. We had a whole set of road networks that were, in GeoJSON that were created for us by our primary consultant, who was Dr. Barry Beitzel, known pretty well for the Moody Atlas of the Bible. Wonderful guy, by the way, to work with, extremely knowledgeable, worked with us on a variety of different projects. And I really valued our partnership with him in that work. But he's really the one who went through and helped us lay out the road networks, helped us decide, well, do we know where this place was? Where do we think it was? Well, here are the candidates. This is the one I think is best. And these are zoomable maps. So, we felt like everybody today is accustomed to using Google Maps for navigation. And so rather than the sort of static maps that you've always had in the back of your Bible, or your Sunday school wall, we really want zoomable maps where you can see different information at different zoom levels. That turned out to be really harder than any of us imagined, actually, because I forget how many levels we might have had, something like 12 or 13 zoom levels. We were using the Mapbox framework for that. And so it really meant you had to designate at each different zoom level what should appear. You can see these cities at levels 6 and below, but not above. When you zoom out, then that city is going to disappear. And Mapbox has its own label conflict resolution logic. You could sort of nudge things around a little, but you couldn't completely control it. So it's actually very hard to get the zoomable design to work well. But let me just, Now, of course, this isn't going to work if I wanted to share my screen. If someone has Logos installed and they click that link, they will see the atlas for the map for the Battle of Elah.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid I can't do that.
Okay, I have Logos installed, but my mouse is gone, probably because you have full control over my computer at the moment.
I have stopped control.
Okay, let's see. Yes. See if this will work. Hopefully. Oh. Yes, open. And I can switch off my ugly face, so
Is Logos, is it a thick client, or it looks like you've got to sign into a web application, but is it thick client software?
Yeah, there's both a desktop application and a web application. So basically it's handing off to the browser application to then connect to the desktop application, which then takes a little time to spin up. The desktop is, of course, the most full-featured one. Okay, but look at this, it's working.
Some of the functionality then you could do in the web application, you're saying, but
yes,
most of it's in the desktop. Okay.
Yeah, actually, the Atlas is in the web version. It is not in the mobile version, but it is in the web version. So, and it's actually a little speedier in the web version for various technical reasons. Okay, so as this spins up, and then if you would, Vincent, in the upper left, if you click that down arrow, you can open up the legend.
yes. You should be able to take control again yourself if you'd like. But
oh, really? No, let's try that.
Yes, allow.
Well, isn't that cool? I'm just trying to see. Yes, in fact, I can click Logos on your screen. Okay, that's actually a really cool feature. Okay, so you can see it. So this is basically the battle between David and Goliath. And you can see the orange travel line here. I don't know if you can see my cursor as I'm wandering around, but that orange travel line sort of shows you here's where Saul's army came from, but then here's where David comes from, you know, from Bethlehem, where he lives, over to the battlefield in the middle. Here's where the Philistines were coming from, but this is sort of where it all happened. And then if I want to know more about Ekron, yep, if I can click on it, then it will, you know, take me to the information about Ekron, and I could go to Factbook. I won't do that, but learn more about that place. And then you can see, since I'm on a roll, I'm going to try it. Can I scroll? Yes, a little slow, but if I scroll, you know, now I'm zoomed out. Now I see less detail. Whoops, too much. I should probably turn this back over to Vincent. But you can sort of see, well, where is this in the world, as it turns out. Now I may be stuck. Oh, no, going back in. And then up to a certain point, you know, I can zoom in. We didn't have super high resolution you know, topography, but you can see there is some topography there. You know, you can almost see there's the valley with the Israelites on one side and the Philistines on the other side, and then they meet in the middle. And then you can see, for example, this, these are travel lines, I believe. And somewhere there, maybe, oh yeah, and there's a very faint dotted blue line in the middle, I believe, that shows a stream going through there, though I don't remember the name of the stream. So that's the example of what we mean by a story map, right? So if you want to understand this story of the, and I should have written down exactly where that story, you know, which passage that came from. But this really shows you the geography involved and how that sort of informs your understanding of the story. Of course, a great many of these things aren't explicit in the text, right? You know, it says, well, David went to the battle. Well, you need to know where David was before. It doesn't say anything about exactly which route he took, but if you sort of know where he was coming from and where he was going, well, there's a natural route that he took. And so those are the kinds of things that went into the atlas design. Let's see, I'm going to stop control. So Vincent, you can go back to the presentation if you would.
Yes. Okay.
So teamwork of control is actually kind of interesting.
Now let's see.
Now I will take control again.
Yeah. I will first put it full screen. Yes. Okay.
So there were some interesting challenges in the Atlas project as well. You know, your first impulse might be to say, well, boy, we've got such great satellite images now. Why not use those? And that's not a terrible idea, but it has some problems. And here's my favorite example of one. If you read Acts 20:15, you'll see that Paul disembarks at the harbor in Miletus. Well, in biblical times, it was a harbor. You can see our atlas map in the upper image there, and all this water here. Today, it is no longer a harbor. It's actually a couple miles from the coastline because the river has basically silted in. And so all of this that used to be water is now land. And so you'd look at that and say, well, that can't be right. It's a harbor. It's in the wrong place. Well, no, it's in the right place. It's just the world has changed. You know, there's another lake north of Galilee that was there in biblical times, but is there no more. You know, the shape and sort of outline of the Dead Sea has changed in some pretty significant ways since, and obviously we don't have exact, you know, we don't have pictures from back then to tell us what it looked like, but we do have other geographic sources to sort of help us understand. So we didn't do a lot of tinkering with the shapes, you know, the outlines of the land and the water, but we had to do at least a few of them, and Miletus was the significant example. So one of the things, and this again came out of our partnership with Barry Beitzel, is we thought it would be really interesting to have a commentary series that really focused on the contributions of geography to understanding various biblical passages. And so Barry Beitzel was the chief editor for this series. So far we've, I have to stop saying we, Faithlife has produced 3 of 6 volumes, one on the Gospels, one on the early church, and I think the one on the Pentateuch has just come out or is about to come out. And then there's 3 more planned, on one on the historical books, and then I believe 2 on the prophets and the wisdom literature. And they're basically a series of essays from scholars who take a particular aspect of the geography related to a biblical passage and unpack it. And it's really fascinating reading if you're a places person, which I assume most of you are. You know, certainly in the Gospels volume, which is the one I'm most familiar with, you know, there's just some really interesting discussion about when it says, you know, there was no room for Mary and Joseph at the inn. Well, was it actually an inn? Probably not. You know, there's some details there about what their travel looked like, what the cultural expectations of family in Bethlehem would be. And it's a really fascinating insight into how I think that Christmas story often gets misunderstood, right, through our traditions about, oh, here's poor Mary wandering around and there's no place she can go. And so she had to, you know, sleep in a barn. Well, none of that's quite right, probably. So you can find that and about 25 or 30 other essays, you know, in the first volume on the Gospels. You know, what does it mean when Jesus talked about the whitewashed tombs in Jerusalem? There actually were tombs there that, you know, that was a visual aid essentially that he was enlisting when he was talking about the Pharisees as being like whitewashed tombs. So that was a really interesting project, and in particular, the digital versions in Logos, we did a lot of work to commission maps from the contributors, to take photographs they had from their own archives, to link them to word studies or other reference information. So it's this really rich combination of text that's hyperlinked to other information in Logos. I think it's a great project. As far as I know, they're continuing on with it. And so I'll be very happy to see more of those volumes come out. Then I've also put here a sort of an older example of the earlier set of biblical places maps, again, mostly done with Barry Beitzel. Here's one showing different regions in the Roman Empire. These are static maps, you know, the kind you're familiar with, though still hyperlinked, right? So you could click on Malta or Rome or some place and then get to the reference information about that place. There were a few other things we did using, you know, geography. It's clearly one aspect of events that ties things together. But that's kind of the overview of the main projects we did at Faithlife. And I see I'm running a little slow here. Then I wanted to add just one more link. There's much more that could go here, but in particular, Stephen Smith, who works at openbible.info, has done a lot of work. He did a project, probably 10, 15 years ago to collect, you know, Google Earth KML files for each biblical place. Some of them weren't that great to start with, but I think they've improved over time. And then he's got this new project that I didn't quite have enough time to find the link to it, but I can, if somebody wants to follow up with me later, I'll find it, where he's essentially trying to make an Uber Atlas combining all the atlases he can find that reference any biblical place. So you can sort of survey the scholarly discussion around all of these different biblical places. And he's a really smart guy. He's got lots of other interesting experiments as well. So I would recommend, if you're interested in this stuff, check out openbible.info, run by Smith.
And to add, the links to his project are also on the Christians in GIS website. So you can find them under resources. And I think he has also made his data available not only as KML, but also as a GitHub repository. And I suspect him of using the classification which is in Logos to also classify all the toponyms he has captured. So because I recognize the same system.
Ah, I see. That's quite possible.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm about to shift from my commercial environment where the things we built got sold in Logos software, and I couldn't really share them all freely, even though I might have wanted to, and into my, you know, putting on my new hat with Clear.Bible. And so before I make that shift, let me just stop for a minute and see if there are any questions, because again, I can't see the chat, so you'll have to actually speak them out loud if you want to ask a question.
I certainly have plenty of questions. So this is Pete Holtzman. I'm a GIS languages cultures data guy, and some familiarity with some of the things we're talking about. Let me prioritize here. You described a wide variety of uncertainties in the data. And I think, being honest, Kingdom information workers in that you can mention. And a couple of examples I could think of, for example, might be uncertainty bands for the geo features, or uncertainty or quality factors applied to data sources, which will allow you to kind of layer the data with the best data in front. Is there anything you can say about that?
Yeah, I mean, you could imagine a lot of sophisticated ways to represent uncertainty. We were not that sophisticated, right? We basically said, we think we know where this is. We might know where this is, or we don't know where this is, right? So we really had those three categories.
Sinai is a good example.
Yes. And so, for example, on the map representing the Exodus, we actually represented three, what Barry Beitzel thought were the three leading theories for the route of the Exodus. And that's obviously tied up with, well, where do you think Sinai is? Because that affects where you think the Exodus took place and where the crossing of the Red Sea took place. So we did occasionally represent that, but that's probably the biggest example. You know, for example, there's a lot of uncertainty about where John the Baptist actually baptized. We know he baptized in the Jordan, but was it down south by Jerusalem and Jericho, or was it up north by Capernaum? Well, ultimately Barry was our guide here, and so he made the. We felt like we couldn't represent that in all of its multiplicity on several different maps, and so he basically said, "Well, I think this one is the most credible." We didn't have a great mechanism to say, what would have been great would be to have a little pop-up note there that says, some scholars believe the location is actually much farther south near the city of Jericho. We didn't, that's not for technical reasons, we couldn't really do that. Though I would have liked to. In fact, we collected a whole series of comments from Barry about pretty much every map. Here's why I think they took this road, not that road. We have not, they had, by the time I left Faithlife, they had not found the right venue in which to publish those, because they were just sort of his offhand comments. They weren't finished prose. I think it would make a fascinating companion to the Atlas to basically have the Atlas commentary. And we talked about this project, it just never got to the top of the list. Here's the interesting things that went into the decisions about where the city is located, where the travel lines go, etc.
Okay. A second really quick question that could turn into, I'm hoping this is of value to everyone, depending on your answer. I happen to be aware that one of the underlying original goals of Lexham Publishing was to enable Logos to have some fully controlled resources that could be released for kingdom use in many languages around the world without worrying about copyright permission. That was a challenge I gave to the founders a long time ago. Are you aware if that's still a goal, and is that a possibility for any of these Lexham geographic resources? Because that would be totally cool.
Yeah, funny you should ask. So I am in discussions with the folks at Faithlife. Now I'm wearing my Bible translation hat, about whether less about the print resources like the geographic commentary and more about the data we created.
Yeah.
What would you think about sharing this data openly so that we can use it for other purposes? And there's this tension, which I appreciate, between, Faithlife is a commercial company. They have funders that they have to satisfy. In particular, they typically don't want to give away things that are active moneymakers for them. On the other hand, it's not like anybody buys Biblical Places data. That's the underpinnings of other information products that are tightly embedded in in what they sell. And so all I can say, I guess, is we're having discussions, and they haven't said no yet.
Okay, I'll just say, let's talk. I have some relationship and influence, and next time I'm in the area, I've been intending to go talk with them, get an update, and we'll see what God can do. Thanks.
Yeah, that's right. So, and I realize I probably took a little longer on all that stuff than maybe I should have. So let me now sprint through my most recent activities, which are with Clear Bible. So we are sort of in some sense, almost a tech startup or technology consultants working with the Bible translation community, which includes both the kind of traditional agencies, Wycliffe, SIL, United Bible Society, Biblica, which used to be called the American Bible Society. And then there are, in fact, some emerging new agencies. Unfolding Word is a pretty big one, that are trying different approaches, all with the goal of how can we actually get a complete Bible translation into the hands of every identified language. And I should have put some things about the goals here, but basically at this point, there are roughly 1,700 languages in the world with essentially no scripture at all, and another 1,700 with only partial scripture, not a complete Bible. And so that's a big challenge. And there's a lot of activity and some significant funding towards what are called the all access goals. So basically, how can we reach something like 99% scripture availability at various levels for all these groups? So that's what, so Clear is in that space, not as translators. We don't do Bible translation, but really as sort of technology enablers. And so in many respects, this is a great fit with sort of all the work that I've been doing at Faithlife for all these years. And so here's just a sort of schematic view of the process of Bible translation, where someone says, okay, is this a unique language? Is it mutually unintelligible? Does it need its own translation? Okay, well, if so, how, what can we understand about that language? How is it written? Does it even have a writing system? Is there any biblical content available now? Are the people, for example, is there an existing church that's ready to begin translation? Then moving into actually creating a translation. Once a translation is drafted, then of course there's a lot of checking that goes into saying, now have we done the right thing here? If a translation team includes multiple people, is it consistent across the different members of the team? We accurately represented the most important theological concepts, for example. And then moving into publishing the actual Bible once it's completed, and engagement with Scripture and with the church. And so the places where CLEAR is really focused are these 3 yellow boxes. How can we help those who are doing translation to really understand the text better? In the drafting and editing stage, how can we help discover any inconsistencies or other problems? Are there mechanical ways or AI-based ways to identify those? And the same step at the quality assurance. And so we're sort of playing in that limited space within the Bible translation activity. In partnership with many others. So we are supported through what's called the Every Tribe, Every Nation Innovation Lab, with Biblica as a close partner, and data from another, and cooperation with a number of other agencies. And so in that sense, we're working together with others to all accomplish these goals. So we have 2 primary projects. One is called Macula. You can see the acronym there for what Macula is, but it's essentially a detailed linguistic analysis of the Hebrew and Greek Bible that's been created over several decades of work, primarily by Dr. Andy Wu and Dr. Randall Tan, who is our VP of Innovation. And so that provides a reading environment where those who know the biblical languages can understand them, can sort of see syntactic displays, can do syntax-based search, can access lexicons and other content. If I were in a different situation, I was going to give you a quick demo, but in the interest of time and complexity, I think we'll skip that at this point. But I'm happy to show it to others. And so this is to just give you a sense of, here's basically 1 line per word for Matthew, showing the breadth of linguistic data that's available for that. Actually, this isn't the full width of the screen, so there's in particular semantic data as well. And so you can think of that as a resource to support those who are part of the translation community, and also to support natural language processing and machine learning activities going forward. There's really 2 primary groups that we serve. One is what we'll call the translator. They typically know their language. I need some fictional language, I guess, to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the language of Roku. Sorry?
Oh, it's nothing.
Okay. So if I'm translating into Roku, there's no Roku Bible, and so I'm the Roku translator. Typically, I would perhaps speak another regional or trade language. If I'm in Africa, it might be Swahili or Hausa or one of those languages. But it's unlikely that I've ever studied Greek or Hebrew. I may, in fact, have limited formal education at all, but I really know my language, Roku. And so the question is, who can I work with to help me gain enough biblical understanding to do that translation? So they're typically working in teams alongside a translation consultant. The translation consultant is much more likely to have some Greek or Hebrew training, maybe some formal linguistic training. They may have done other translations themselves. They also know the regional language. They don't know Roku. And so they're communicating in an intermediary language with the translator, and then working with the translator to try to make sure the result is of good quality. So now I'm shifting to a second project that CLEAR is engaged with, and this is the one that I'm sort of actively leading at this point, called Enhanced Resources++. The name Enhanced Resources comes from an existing facility in SIL Paratext, which is probably the most commonly used platform for Bible translators. It's not the only one, for sure, but it's a very widely used one. I think I've heard numbers like 5,000 or 6,000, translation projects in the world are using Paratext. And so the basic idea is to add hyperlinks to the text so that a translator or a translation consultant who's working through the text can see maps, or let's see, actually, I think the next slide shows this. Can see, a picture of what the temple would have looked like, translation notes for a particular passage, lexical information about a particular word. You can certainly imagine maps, videos, those kinds of resources tied to the text so that they can essentially click on a word or a verse and get more information to help them understand the passage they're trying to translate. Now, the challenge, of course, is how do you connect this information in a way that is scalable? Because if we tie it to the Greek and Hebrew text, but you don't read Greek and Hebrew, that's not going to help you. If we try to attach that text to every one of many of these sort of regional or trade language, or they're usually called languages of wider communication, numbering 30, 40, 50, well, that's a lot of different languages to do all that for. So what we're planned to do instead is sort of schematized here. We attach this reference information to the source text, and then we do word level alignment between, let's say, a Spanish translation in the source text or a Chinese translation in the source text. That's under the hood. So the translator, let's say, who's reading Chinese to translate into some remote language in Vietnam, perhaps. But if they know Chinese, they can click on a Chinese word. Under the hood, it goes to the corresponding Greek or Hebrew word, looks up the associated information, and displays it to them. We call that alignment. So the United Bible Society has a variety of alignments, and these are all openly available, either in progress. These aren't all done, but a number of these are done, and many of these, the rest are in progress. That's still not a long enough list. There are probably twice that many that are in scope for the next few years to create alignments to the Greek and Hebrew text so that we can make this enhanced resources system work. I'm sort of running out of time, so I'm going to skip over this. But the basic idea is you bootstrap an alignment using a machine learning technique, and then humans have tools that they can use to correct them, either one verse at a time on the right by sort of drawing lines between things and saying this aligns to that, or with a concordance view that lets them, this is showing Hausa, that lets them say, okay, how are the different ways that this word has been aligned to Greek and Hebrew words? And if I've got one that's wrong, then maybe I want to collect that in batch mode. We're kind of working out, and so as you can imagine, we have a lot of these alignments we want to produce, and so we need to find some standardized data formats to share them. Clear will probably be creating a repository to collect and share those in the coming year. Here's some other activities in the Bible translating community. Sorry, I have to sprint through this last bit, but let me at least get to, and if you want to follow up, here's contact information for me. Here's Clear's website, and again, a couple of Git repos. Everything that Clear does is by our charter, openly licensed, available for anybody to use for any purpose whatsoever. And so if any of this data is useful to you, you're invited to download it. We'd be happy to help you get started with it, get value out of it. And there will be more to come in the coming years. And now I'll pause again, even though I've sort of run out of time. I'm sorry for that. And if there are either questions, if people need to drop off, I completely understand. I will not be offended in the least. I'm happy to hang around for a while and answer questions if that works for folks, or feel free to follow up, via email or something else.
Okay. I found it was a real great presentation, lots of information, and I think Mark Seigen has a question. So Mark. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Sorry to interrupt, Vincent. I was applauding, but I do have a question, so I was just getting in line. So you can finish what you were saying.
Okay, well, it's no problem. One thing which came to my mind was since you are working at Clear Bible, and Clear Bible is intentionally working open source, open data, and we have the information, for instance, by Stephen Smith on geographical data. Would it be something to make the data from Stephen Smith available also in the Clear Bible platform, so we can aid, like Pete said, also other countries, but also align and make geographical data available in other languages?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's in our broad charter. I don't know where that falls in our priorities for this year, but there's both Stephen Smith's data. Robert Rouse has actually done a lot of essentially open source people, places, things data, and so that's available. Then, of course, there would have to be some coordination between those. We might want to compare that to what's available in Logos. I'm still sort of hoping they might be willing to share at least some aspects of their data. So I think there's a good prospect of both collecting these resources and sort of synchronizing them to make they probably each have their unique advantages. And so really something that would sort of tie those together and provide one centralized repository for biblical place data, that would be fantastic. That would be a dream.
Maybe because I was thinking also about the dataset David Instone Brewer provided. It is from Tyndale.
Yes.
So that would also be something, and also the I think it's the Pleiades dataset about the ancient world from the Ancient World Mapping Center.
Yep.
Which also would be very interesting because it also it's also in the craft data structure, and also has lots of connections to the ancient world, but also to Wikipedia and also already media files. So that would be also really interesting to explore at least.
Yes, right. I mean, it's the Getty Thesaurus. There's a number of sources, all with their unique capabilities, and so something that sort of tied those together, focusing on biblical places, would be fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, I will pass on to Mark.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, Sean, for the presentation. Excellent and good to see what you're doing, especially now in your new role, but also the good work that you've done at Logos. As Vincent, and I think Vincent and I have had an interest in biblical places for a long time. My question was more on the all access, because I think that's the focus you have right now, or at least at Clear. You're one of the members or one of the players with all access. You mentioned a number of people that are collaborating in that. I've gone to the website and looked at it, but how do they work together towards this common goal? Is it virtual? Is it ad hoc, or is it very organized?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts. I probably don't understand all of them. A lot of the activity is coming from what's called the E10 Innovation Lab. The Innovation Lab has several focus areas. One is called the Translation Resources Ecosystem. They're trying to basically figure out how do we gather all the openly available resources that will help translators and make them available. Another group is focusing on AI and NLP. Another group is focusing on quality assurance, and SIL is taking a leading role there. They've got a major project, which is on my last slide, called Aqua. So it's kind of an acronym soup of a whole lot of different projects and a lot of different players. Trying to think if there's trying to think of the best way to where to point you to get more information about it. Probably the Every Tribe, Every Nation website would be the most, would be a good starting place, because they're really, that would be e10.bible.
Okay.
And that describes the all access goals, names a lot of the players, and would probably be a good starting point. If there's more particular things you're interested in, I could probably do some research and figure out, who to put you in touch with.
Okay. And you said E10. How do you spell that?
ETEN. It's an acronym for every tribe, every nation.
Got it. Okay. I think I've been to their website, but I'll go back and look at it. Thank you.
Yeah. So
And thanks for your good work. It's amazing to see the community come together. We all have a common goal. Let's work together. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions? So please feel free to ask.
I have a question, but it might be hard to answer since you're no longer with Faithlife. But I was wondering, obviously, in the modern digital world, we're talking a lot about digital twins, and I'm just curious if Faithlife is going to go down to the level of a digital twin ancient, like an ancient Jerusalem digital twin or something like that.
I'm not sure I know what you mean by a digital twin. TWI.
Yeah, I can broadly define it, and others can help me. Basically, it's usually a three-dimensional model of the environment.
Yes.
In the best form possible, so that you can, locate, navigate, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Faithlife is not doing any work in that space that I'm aware of. Dan Warner has had a project for several years to make 3D models of various biblical sites. He's got a 3D model of Jerusalem that we integrated into Logos. I don't remember the name of his project, but Dr. Dan Warner is, let's say, New Orleans Baptist Seminary. There are actually several different groups that have made, particularly done 3D models of Jerusalem, the temple at the time of Christ, what the city would have looked like. So there are people who are interested in that kind of stuff.
And there are
Thank you.
And there are also some initiatives for the ancient world. For instance, there's the Rome Reborn project, and I think it has been rebranded to, sorry for my pronunciation, but Your Escape. So I will put it in the chat, which is nice just to play with for a moment. Are there any?
Question.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead,
Okay.
Greg. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just asking for other questions, so please.
Yeah. I totally lost it. My brain just went blank. I'm sorry. Oh, must be a. What day is today? I'm losing it.
Do you remember your name?
It'll probably come back. I totally lost it.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I also have an additional one just to fill in some time so Michael can remember his question. But do you know whether there were initiatives within Faithlife also to start mapping events from church history, which of course is a large time span to cover and also a large area, but
yes.
Yeah.
Well, when I was laid off, the other person from my group who was laid off was our cartographer. So I think the chances of them making maps of church history is pretty slim because they don't have anybody with that expertise anymore.
No. Okay.
I remember now. I remember. So obviously the ethos of some organizations is to be as open as they can with data, and then others understandably want to, gain some profit so they can continue their mission. So it seems that Faithlife, the way you're describing them, is more on the second part of what I described there. Are they moving towards being more open with their data, or are they just going, in your mind, going to stay in this sphere of trying to gain money through subscribers?
I mean, they are a commercial business. They have, funding partners who expect a return on their investment. So I don't see that fundamentally changing anytime soon. I will say there was actually a big step just in the last month, which is the SPL G&T, Greek New Testament, which was really a project that Faithlife started and then pursued in cooperation with the Society for Biblical Literature to produce a mostly open text to the Greek New Testament, because you may realize that the critical editions of the Greek New Testament are under copyright. And so Faithlife's first attempt when they built it about 10 years ago was a very limited license to try to protect just a few things, but make it open for a lot of use. But they decided in the last month that they have now switched to a completely open license. And that, I do have to say, that is in part because we've been talking to them about these resources and about open sharing. So I think, I think there's prospect, since their mission is to help the church, I think there are prospects for them to, under the right circumstances, share data or resources openly when it doesn't conflict with their own commercial charter and when it's genuinely useful. So I'm going to stay optimistic that there may be some more coming. But that's at least one thing in the last month that has changed, and changed for the better, right? That is now, I would say, the leading Greek New Testament that is freely available. There are others. We've been using one from 1904 because it was out of copyright. So at some point, I expect we will now switch to the SPL G&T. There's at least one other under development that I'm aware of in the Bible translation community that may continue, and then there'll be two.
Yeah, it's exciting to really hear that these organizations are working together and trying to find a way to, make some of this data open source, because I just think that helps our united goal of reaching the world with Christ's message quicker.
Right. Yeah.
More effectively.
I've worked both sides of that line, right? And so,
yeah,
as you might guess, after 15 years, in a development group that got up to 20 people, well, those people all had salaries. We never would have been able to create that data if those were, volunteers, or if we didn't have the funding we had to do it. So I can appreciate both sides, but yes.
Yeah,
right.
it's just trying to find the funding that's always the challenge, right? I mean, I'm the same. I work for an organization that's nonprofit, so very much the same. But it is the challenge and the balance. Thank you.
Yeah. But I remember the saying, there is the money is there, but it's only in the wrong pockets. So before we go to you, Pete, there was a question of Koji. I don't know how to pronounce your name, so I'm sorry if it's wrong, but please take the floor.
Hello, am I audible enough?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so mine is on the question of travel time computations. I think Sean alluded to Vincent also being part of that project. So how far is that project, and how are you able to determine the travel times?
I'm sorry, Kochi, there was just a little break up there and I didn't quite get the question. Could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry, mine is on the question of travel time computations. The question would be, how far is the project, and how are you able to determine the travel times?
I heard, how are you able to determine, but I didn't get that last one.
So I can rephrase. Koji is asking about travel time computation, which was when we first got into contact, what is the status of the project within Faithlife, and then I can add maybe a bit about my work.
Yeah, so in Faithlife, we started to collect some data, but didn't get all that far with it. And so I don't think they've, and I would be a little surprised if that continued on, but it might. So we didn't really get very far with it, other than sort of collecting starting to organize various trips. How was that trip made? Where is it described in the text? But I think we have an expert with us who actually knows all about this stuff, which is Vincent.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether I know all about it. I know something about this. For those who don't know me, so I did my PhD on using GIS for biblical studies and interpretation. And one of my the articles I wrote was on Acts 17, verse 14 and 15, and that's the story is situated in Paul's second missionary journey, as we traditionally call this, and Paul is escaping from Berea to Athens. And especially for that part, I used GIS data. So what I used was SRTM data, so a Hive model. And upon that Hive model, I applied least cost path distance algorithms to decide what could be possible routes to arrive at Athens. A second source which I used was the orbis.org website, which was also referenced by Mark Seigen in the chat. And the data behind that website is also available on GitHub in an open repository. And that's type of data which is very generalized, but that data within Orbis you can also use to do network analysis. There are a number of caveats, of course. One of the caveats is that Orbis data is a road network modeled on the situation, I think, on 200 AD. And also for the possible or potential sea routes which you could take. It has been based on wind direction data, depth of so the depth of the sea, possible there's a different a number of other parameters, but it's still quite rough. But that data makes it possible to also calculate the fastest route over sea. So and by combining that data, well, you can get an impression of what are possible routes. And we also already mentioned the Ancient World Mapping Center, awmc.org, I think. I'm not sure, but they also do have some data available on the Roman road network, which with also a lot of caveats. But by combining all these sources, it is possible to do an estimation on what could have been possible. And now the scholar in me is speaking, because I need to be very careful about being too sure about arriving at conclusions, but it helps. And that's also one of the conclusions from my research. It helps to live in the story, and also to to be able to get a better understanding of what is possible, and also how much time things would have taken. So I hope that answered your question. Maybe it was a lengthy answer, but yeah.
No, actually, you've made it more interesting. I'll probably check out your GitHub profile if you uploaded that there. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. Pete, take the floor.
I just have a brief comment. I've personally known the founders of Logos for almost 30 years, and it's a difficult challenge that they face. So I want to assure you, they very much are committed to making resources available. Copyright is a harder problem than most of us can appreciate. And the challenge of operating a for-profit business in the arena they're working is incredibly hard. I've had my shoulder cried on occasion. So just Amazon is a very painful competitor in the publishing business. Okay. Yep. I don't want to go into a lot of detail. I don't want to turn this into a long thing, but I can tell you, having known their hearts, they really do want to see this happen. And when I visited up there, I mean, the founder, he took me over to the Lexham bookshelf and said, Pete, this is a visual demonstration of my commitment to head in this direction. Yeah. And I was wonderfully surprised and shocked at the progress being made, and what you just described, Sean, in terms of, here's a very powerful resource being made available that has never been open like that ever, right? So I think we could have a lot of hope for the future, honestly.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more dimension to that. The ability to get Logos Bible software in a variety of languages beyond English is only because essentially the English users paid for a lot of development, and then we adopted a strategy that made it easy to localize that for other languages. And my team was a big part of that localization effort. But that really means that many parts of the world that don't have the same financial resources are getting the benefit of that development because it's a commercial product.
Okay, so I think we have space for one final question, and then because we are really running out of time, but you gave so much food for thought that it's really appreciated. So is there someone who wants to ask the final question? Please don't be so shy. Okay, so I think you've blown them off their socks by giving them so much information and food for thought. Oh, Mark Seigen, come in, please.
Yeah, no, I was waiting in case someone else wanted to ask a question, but Sean, thank you for your presentation. I think it's amazing. I think there were some things where you said you didn't have enough time to go into depth, so maybe we can talk about you coming back again in the future. So thank you for your good work in both Logos as well as Clear. I did want to make one comment, is that this is, Vincent, probably more for us as organizers, but just so people are aware, I think there would have been more people on this webinar, but when you registered for the event, it actually went to the wrong time frame. So that's something we'll need to look at internally, but there may, I think the small number does not indicate the level of importance of what you're doing, Sean. So thank you.
Well, I guess this has been recorded, right? So that recording will be available. And maybe Vincent, if you can follow up with me, I'd love to have that link to the recording for others.
Yeah. So the process usually is Juliana shares the recording, and it will be put on our website. So I'm just reading the chat. But we do have a YouTube channel, so there it will be posted. But there are links on the Christians in GIS.org website, and so now it's time for the commercial break, of course. But you can find everything on the Christians in GIS website. And by the way, we are having also a logo contest, which was announced in our LinkedIn group, in a Gmail group, and also on the Facebook group, because we really would like to have, because we now trying to broaden the scope of the group, and also to a little bit professionalize the group, to have a nice looking logo. So if there are people who do have design skills, please enter the logo contest without the S, of course. So we would like people. Then there will be a voting round also to decide upon which is the best logo. And I think finally, the pre-final remark is that within a month there will be another webinar, and then we will have Rob Woodbury. He's a senior professor at Baylor University, and I think he also has a really intriguing subject he's going to talk about. And maybe he will touch upon other things, but he will also discuss his PhD the research, which was upon the measuring the effects of Christian missions in Africa, and I really recommend also his webinar. And then finally is a big thank you, and I think also a applause to Sean in just introducing us into the world of Logos, but also into the world of Clear and the amazing work you are doing. So thank you very much, and thank you for giving your time also in sharing with us. So
You're very welcome.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sean. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, folks.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.